You're tuned into That's Life, where we celebrate the beauty, the chaos, and the wonder of real life. Sometimes it makes you laugh, sometimes it makes you cry, but it always makes you feel. Settle in. We're just getting started. Alice walked unhurriedly along Shady Lane, returning from the shop. It was mid-September, the time of Indian summer. Nature generously gifted the little town the last warm days. The trees were already touched with gold. The air was filled with the scent of sun-warmed herbs. Young mothers with toddlers strolled along the well-tended paths. The heavy bag of groceries pulled at Alice's arm. Today she had promised Eleanor Peterson to make cheese soup. And she also needed to finish her term paper by tomorrow. Otherwise, the mistress of the house would be displeased. Now Alice was studying independently under Eleanor Peterson's strict supervision. She was a demanding teacher, giving no quarter to her only student. Alice even liked it. The results were impressive. She felt quite ready to enter university. There were only a few months left until the exams. She wished it would be soon. Soon she would be a student again, even if it was a distance learning program. It didn't matter. Alice frowned. Memories of the past flooded back again. It had been a very difficult period in her life. So much had fallen on her. How had she endured then? How had she not broken? The girl herself couldn't understand it. But now everything was good. Life had improved. Alice even had her own room. Small, but very cozy, with a beautiful view of the wide, almost rural street. Eleanor Peterson's house was in a private sector. In the mornings, a rooster's crow could be heard from somewhere. Boys raced on bicycles along the quiet streets with little traffic. Old women sat on benches by the fences. Quiet. Peaceful. It seemed that nearby towered multi-story buildings. Cars rushed in an endless stream. People hurried somewhere. But here reigned peace and tranquility. This area wasn't considered particularly prestigious, but Alice liked it very much. The girl unlocked the gate and entered a small cherry orchard. The dog Duplex greeted her with a joyful bark, ran up, sniffed the bags, and wagged his tail furiously. Alice smiled, patted him on the back of the neck, and took out a treat from her bag that she had bought especially for him. The dog yelped with delight. She was always happy to see his joy. The girl went up to the porch and opened the door. "I'm home," she called out. "Put the kettle on. Our show is about to start," Eleanor Peterson replied from her room. The elderly woman was a distant relative of Alice's. The girl herself got confused about the degrees of kinship. In short, Eleanor Peterson's children were the second cousins of Alice's mother. The girl hadn't even suspected the existence of these people. They first met at Alice's mother's funeral 2 years ago. Then the inconsolable girl had to greet many unfamiliar faces. Some of them turned out to be her relatives, all very distant. The girl shivered again from the memories that flooded back, as always, unexpectedly. Perhaps it was due to the approaching anniversary of that sad event. Then 2 years ago, it was also September. Only not like now, warm, sunny, gentle. At that time, the weather had been slushy and gloomy for several weeks straight. Alice's mother often complained of heart pain, measured her blood pressure, and took pills. She rarely went to doctors. only in the most extreme cases. Several times the woman was taken to the hospital with an attack. Alice, who was still quite a child then, stayed with neighbors and flinched at every phone call. What if it was from the hospital? What if something irreparable had happened to Mom? The fear of losing her mother had lived in Alice since childhood. Firstly, her mother had a weak heart. Secondly, she lacked the time and money for proper treatment. And thirdly, her mother had to raise her daughter alone without support from relatives. It was not easy. Alice didn't know her father. Her mother once said that her only daughter was born as a result of a short, passionate romance with a man who came to town on a business trip. Her mother had no idea where he was from, what he did, or if he had a family. That's just how it happened, and that's all. I don't regret anything, the woman often repeated. A daughter from such a man is the best gift of fate. Over time, Alice began to suspect that her mother still loved this man and he had gone somewhere and didn't even suspect the existence of his daughter. Didn't you try to find him? Alice asked her mother more than once. They live very difficultly, and there are moments in a girl's life when she needs a father so much. But her mother shook her head negatively. No, I didn't look. And why? He surely has his own life, a family. He didn't promise me anything. You are only mine. Her mother was the closest person to Alice. She always supported her, gave timely, unobtrusive advice, knew how to dispel any melancholy with a couple of words, and knew exactly when it was best to leave her daughter alone and not bother her with questions. The woman worked as a cleaner in a local shopping center. And after her shift, she also worked as a dishwasher in a nearby cafe. She had no education. Alice's mother was raised in an orphanage. Her parents led an inappropriate lifestyle, so the girl was removed from the family. But Alice's mother did not receive an apartment from the state as an orphan. Why? Because she had a share in her paternal grandmother's house. If you had a grandmother, how did you end up in an orphanage? Alice was confused when she first heard her mother's story. I had a grandmother and other relatives, but nobody needed a difficult child. My parents didn't raise me, they drank, they weren't up to it, and I grew up like a weed, so they sent me to an orphanage. And then, after some time, there was a fire in my parents' house. Nothing was left, neither my mother and father, nor their guests, nor the house itself. That's how I became an orphan. Time passed. Alice's mother graduated from the orphanage. She dropped out of culinary technical school almost immediately. There was no time to attend classes, money for food wouldn't earn itself. At first, the girl lived with her grandmother, but in that dilapidated old house, many other distant relatives were also crammed in besides her. None of them were happy about the new lodger, so they paid her her share for the house and sent her on her way. They pulled a fast one, of course. Alice's mother shook her head. But I didn't understand anything then. An 18-year-old girl who hadn't seen life. So I was left without a home, without support, without education. I had to go into cleaning. Where else? I couldn't even properly wield a mop there. I never had to wash floors in the orphanage. And at my grandmother's, it was a completely different planet. So I had to learn on the fly. The girl rented a tiny apartment in a wooden barracks, got a job, and made friends among her neighbors. And life flowed on. Sometimes thoughts came about finishing her studies, but she immediately remembered the boring lectures and practical classes, and the desire somehow faded away. And why? Life wasn't bad as it was. Why these extra problems? And there was no one nearby, no one advised me, a foolish girl, that I absolutely had to get an education. So you, daughter, study, study, don't be lazy. Maybe you'll make something of yourself. Your father is smart, educated, wealthy, so you have all the cards in your hands. And Alice did study. She was always among the best students in her class. Academics came easily to her. She even consistently won prizes at Olympiads. Her mother rejoiced at these successes, was proud of her talented daughter, and carefully kept all her certificates in a separate folder. The day Alice was born was the happiest for her mother. At least, she often told her daughter that. You were the most beautiful baby. Big, intelligent eyes, deep blue, and eyelashes like fans. All the hospital staff ran to admire you. Raising a daughter alone was not easy, but the woman managed. She had to take on extra jobs. Alice's mother worked from morning till night, often without days off or vacation. She tried to ensure her girl had everything she needed, that she was dressed no worse than others, and well fed. Mother and daughter huddled in the same small room in the wooden barracks. Alice liked the place, but her mother often sighed that there was no possibility of moving somewhere more respectable. Alice considered herself quite a happy person. She had many friends in the barracks. They loved playing in the weed-infested yard. In the summer, the children only ran home to grab a bite and then rushed back outside for new adventures. Their parents were all busy with work, so the boys and girls, left to their own devices, rejoiced in their freedom. At that time, they weren't bothered that they lived in one of the poorest districts of the city. These children simply didn't know any other life. Alice's childhood was clouded only by anxiety for her mother. She got sick too often. Her mother would turn pale, her lips would turn blue, sweat would bead on her forehead. The woman would start breathing with a strange wheeze and rattle. Sometimes it would pass on its own or after taking a pill. Sometimes the girl had to run to a neighbor and call an ambulance. Periodically, her mother was taken to the hospital, but this happened rarely. Usually, the woman refused hospitalization. "What are you doing, Sarah? Don't you feel sorry for yourself?" the neighbor would say with regret in such cases. "How can I go to the hospital now? I work unofficially. There will be no sick pay. If I don't bring home a salary, what will my daughter eat? I'm thinking about my daughter." If you're thinking about your daughter, first and foremost, take care of your health. Go to the hospital. Ali can stay with us for a while. I'll save up a little money first, and then I will. But Alice's mother never found the time or money for herself. To her daughter, shocked by another attack, she promised with a smile, "Nothing will happen to me while you are little. Understood? I know what it's like to grow up in an orphanage, and I won't let that happen. You won't end up there. But your heart, it needs treatment. What if you're gone?" "That won't happen for a long time. My health isn't that weak. Everything will be fine. You'll see." And everything was indeed fine. Alice finished school, got into university on a scholarship, and even into the most prestigious faculty at that time, economics. Her mother's joy knew no bounds. She called all the neighbors with the happy news. People congratulated her, rejoicing that the woman's dream had come true. "Just study well now," her mother instructed Alice. You'll achieve a lot, I feel it. Alice intended to get straight A's, graduate from university with honors, and get a high paying job. The future shone with rainbow colors, appearing in bright tones. The girl was indeed successful in everything. Some things weren't easy, but she had no lack of persistence. In her first year, Alice didn't get a single B on her transcript, only A's. She even started receiving an increased scholarship. But in her second year, at the very beginning of the academic year, what Alice feared most in the world happened. In the evening, her mother was struck by another attack. The woman turned pale as a sheet. Her lips became completely blue. She couldn't breathe in. She wheezed. She choked. A terrible sight. Alice called an ambulance. The doctors arrived quickly, but even those 7 minutes of waiting seemed like an eternity to Alice. Her mother had never been so ill before. Soon the apartment filled with people in saturated turquoise uniforms. They pushed Alice toward the door, opened their bags, and bent over the patient. The girl understood that this was bad from the worried look of these people, from the phrases they exchanged among themselves. Anxiety squeezed Alice's heart. Goosebumps ran down her back. Her head swam. Her legs felt like cotton, as if they were not her own. The girl had never been so scared. But hope then still, Alice clung to it like a thin branch. Yes, Mom is really bad this time, but the doctors should help her. If they save her mother, everything will be different after this. Alice will no longer let her mother avoid hospitalization. She will take her parents' treatment into her own hands, and everything will be fine. After all, her mother is quite young, not even 40. But the paramedics suddenly asked Alice to leave the room in a sharp tone. The situation was getting out of control. The girl heard phrases like, "We won't make it to the hospital," and "cardiac arrest." Terrible, frightening, hopeless words. Alice obediently went into the hallway, sat down on the floor, and covered her face with her hands. She wanted to hide from everything happening in the saving darkness. "My condolences." A doctor came out into the corridor, took off his uniform jacket but not his cap. "We did everything we could. You need to sign some papers." Alice thought she screamed, loudly and desperately. Hot tears streamed from her eyes. The terrible truth reached her gradually, and then everything swam before her eyes, spinning. The girl lost consciousness. She woke up on the sofa in the room of her neighbor, Aunt Carol. "My poor dear," the woman sighed. "So young, and now you'll have to make your way in life yourself." Aunt Carol helped organize the funeral. Many unfamiliar people came to say goodbye. Her mother's colleagues, her friends, relatives. Yes, it seemed that Alice had many relatives whose existence she hadn't even suspected. Her mother sometimes mentioned things, but Alice wasn't interested in listening about unfamiliar people. That's when they approached her. Her mother's second cousins, Stephen and Victoria. Both looked well-groomed, clearly well off. They handed her an envelope with a small sum of money, wished her to be strong and composed. Alice looked at them with hope. Maybe they would offer their help and support. She, so confused and crushed by grief, desperately needed someone to lean on right now. But the relatives apparently considered their duty done, expressed their condolences again, and left. About a week after the funeral, Alice started thinking about what to do next. She had to earn money somehow. She was 18, an adult. But what kind of work? And most importantly, when? Her studies occupied all the girl's time. It seems you'll have to drop out of university, Aunt Carol said sadly, shaking her head. It's a shame. Your mother was so happy when you got in. There's no way out, the girl sighed. She understood that her neighbor was right. She wouldn't be able to combine studying and working. And if she didn't work, she would soon be kicked out of her rented apartment. And she wouldn't have anything to eat. So it turned out that Alice dropped out of university and got a job, like her mother, as a cleaner in a shop. Ironically, the very same one. A year flew by unnoticed. Alice barely made ends meet. The physical work was tiring, but the thoughts of her mother were even more exhausting. The girl grieved. Her soul ached. It was difficult to get used to the new reality, to a world where no one loved her and no one cared for her. Alice didn't like remembering those days. Even the thought of them made her feel heavy again. But what could she do? She had to accept reality and understand that life is like that. Unpredictable, difficult, not always gentle. One time, the girl was returning home, late from her shift. Her hands ached. Her back throbbed. Alice could barely move her legs and only thought about getting to her cozy soft sofa as quickly as possible. People were standing near her door. In the semi-darkness of the stairwell, the girl didn't recognize them at first and was scared. But then they came out onto the landing, closer to the light. It was those distant relatives she had seen at the funeral, a man and a woman, Stephen and Victoria, her mother's second cousins, which meant they were her uncle and aunt. Hello, Victoria smiled. She looked about 45, well-groomed in an expensive coat, smelling of clearly not cheap perfume. Stephen stood behind her shoulder, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. Hello? The girl stammered in surprise. Of all people, she certainly hadn't expected to see them on her doorstep. We're here to see you, the man said briefly, and added, on business. On business? What kind of business could they possibly have together? Alice's surprise grew. Remembering social etiquette, she unlocked the door and let the guests in, frantically wondering if she had managed to make the sofa in the morning and clear the breakfast leftovers from the table. It would be awkward if she hadn't. She had managed. The apartment greeted the visitors with silence and cleanliness. Victoria and Stephen looked around, taking everything in, as people always do when they enter a new place. Where should we sit? Victoria smiled awkwardly. Here, Alice gestured towards the only sofa in the apartment. Victoria and Stephen settled on it. Alice sat on a chair opposite them. An awkward silence hung in the air. The girl was already thinking about offering the guests tea. It was difficult to bear this oppressive silence. But Victoria finally spoke. Well, how are you living? How are you managing on your own? Alice shrugged. Strange. They remembered her after a year, interested in her affairs. And before that? Well, things seem to be getting better, the girl replied. I'm working as a cleaner like Mom. I had to drop out of university. Poor girl, Victoria shook her head. It was impossible to tell from her tone and face whether she was genuinely sympathetic to Alice or just pretending. You're still young. You can still study, Stephen said carelessly. Yes, that's what I plan to do. I'll save up some money and get back on my feet a bit. Good plan, Victoria approved. Well, generally, judging by the state of this apartment, it seems to me that you don't have enough money to live on. I have enough, Alice objected. I pay the rent. I'm not starving. I'm managing. We have a proposal for you, Stephen stated directly. Victoria shot him an annoyed look. A proposal? Alice raised her eyebrows in surprise. Yes, Victoria nodded. A friendly smile appeared on her face again. We want to offer you free accommodation, food, and a small salary. I think this is a way out for you right now. How so? The girl didn't understand. Now, I'll explain. Victoria took a deep breath and began her story. Eleanor Peterson, Victoria and Stephen's mother, had worked her whole life in the dean's office of the local economic college. She did administrative work and managed to teach. Energetic, authoritative, independent, decisive. It was hard for her to retire, even though it happened when Eleanor Peterson was already 75 years old. The woman absolutely did not want to leave her beloved college. She felt that everything would fall apart without her. Nevertheless, age is a stubborn thing, so Eleanor Peterson had to settle down at home. Then the woman took up the house and garden. She renovated everything, set up a small vegetable patch, took up singing, and became a member of the local elderly choir. Her nature demanded vigorous activity, but this still wasn't enough. Eleanor Peterson yearned for the times when she was a sought-after and indispensable employee of the college. What about grandchildren? Alice asked. Why doesn't she look after her grandchildren? She's not working. The girl had always dreamed of a loving grandmother who would bake her pies, listen to her joys and sorrows, and teach her to cook or knit. Stephen grunted. Victoria took the floor again. You see, my children, like Stephen's children, they have grown up. Yes, there was a period when they needed a grandmother and we needed support because work and young children are difficult. You'll find out yourself later. But for Mom then, there was no question of leaving the college. She loved her work too much. So the grandchildren barely know her. They are, in essence, strangers to each other. Alice shook her head. How could that be? Was it really true that the grandmother didn't care about her grandchildren? There was clearly resentment in Victoria's voice, as if she still couldn't forgive her mother for not helping her with the children. In short, Mom's health deteriorated. Her blood pressure started acting up. The doctor prescribed her pills, which she often forgot to take. And at her age, of course, she should have had less physical activity. Mom, she spent whole days working in her garden, in the heat, and in the cold. Well, and this is the result. She had a stroke, Stephen explained in an even, calm voice. It wasn't noticeable from his face that he was particularly worried about this. But Victoria sighed heavily at her brother's words. Yes, a stroke. The woman bowed her head. A neighbor noticed Mom lying right on the garden bed and called an ambulance. The doctors fought for her life for a long time. They didn't give us any prognosis. They even advised us to prepare for the worst. But she pulled through. Pulled through? Stephen sneered. Pulled through? She's bedridden. What are you saying? Victoria gave her brother an angry look. Bedridden? Yes. Her legs are very weak now, and one arm barely moves, but Mom walks, albeit with support. She's in her right mind. She just needs someone with her constantly now to prepare food, get her water, clean up, take her outside. She refuses a caregiver categorically, Stephen said, with annoyance. Yes, she refuses. Victoria nodded her head sadly. She doesn't want a stranger in the house with her. She doesn't trust strangers. And you? Alice asked. Well, what about me? I have work, my own family. Stephen here also works from morning till night, and he's often sent on business trips. We absolutely cannot be tied down to our mother. We tried to persuade her to get a caregiver. We even brought several candidates to Mom in the hospital when she was transferred from intensive care to a regular ward. No, and that's final. You can't trust a stranger in the house. Who knows what they're thinking? Stephen quoted his mother. Therefore, Victoria's voice became soft and insinuating, like Alice the Fox from the film Pinocchio. Therefore, we need not a stranger, but someone of our own, a relative. You mean me? Alice finally understood what was going on. Of course, you, the woman nodded. You are the absolute best option, young, quick, our relative, meaning not a stranger. And you're in need, no point beating around the bush. And so you will live in Mom's house in good conditions. You won't have to pay rent. And taking care of her isn't such a difficult job. We will pay you. You'll start saving. You can go back to university later. Mom, you see, Victoria shook her head meaningfully, not finishing the sentence. Well, Alice, of course, understood everything. For some reason, she felt uncomfortable. You'll have your own room, Stephen began to list. Food. You can play computer games. You'll just need to feed her sometimes, help her wash up, and take her for a walk. Ideal conditions. I need to think about it, Alice said slowly. What is there to think about? Victoria threw up her hands. Leave your phone number. I'll call you back. All right. Just don't delay. We'll have to look for other options if you refuse. Mom is being discharged soon. After the relatives left, Alice fell into thought. She had never taken care of elderly, sick people. She couldn't even imagine what it was like. Could she handle it? What if this old woman turned out to be grumpy, mean, or a very difficult invalid? Victoria and Stephen could easily just not be telling the whole truth to get Alice to agree to their terms. On the other hand, it really was a way out. Surely, helping an old woman with household chores after a stroke was better than running up and down floors with a mop all day. And the relatives promised a good salary. Plus, she wouldn't have to spend money on rent and food. When would she get another chance to save up for her studies? And Alice made up her mind. She didn't wait until morning. She called Victoria back that same evening. Wonderful, the woman exclaimed happily. You're a good girl. The right choice. Mom is being discharged next Monday. We'll bring her home and come for you right away. Be ready, pack your things, settle your affairs. Agreed, Alice replied. Her life would probably change a lot. Whether these changes would be for the better or not, she would know later, much later. But if something went wrong, she could always leave, right? No one would keep her there against her will. On Monday, as Victoria had promised, Stephen picked the girl up. He had a very beautiful and seemingly expensive car. Alice wasn't familiar with foreign cars. It was a black, shiny SUV. Yes, these relatives certainly weren't short of money. The man drove her to the private sector. Behind the fences, all sorts of houses flashed by, dilapidated shacks and practically palaces. Victoria and Stephen's mother's house turned out to be something in between. Solid, well built, but at the same time quite modest, not pretentious. Alice noticed the garden. Cherry trees, bright flower beds, vegetable patches. And everywhere there were funny garden figures. Gnomes, hedgehogs, rabbits. It looked very sweet. The girl even smiled. Mom loved to putter around here with these garden beds, with the flower beds, Stephen explained, noticing the girl's reaction. Now everything here will fall into disrepair. It won't, Alice thought. I won't let that happen for anything. The girl felt sorry for the work of the elderly woman she didn't know yet. It was immediately clear that the garden meant a lot to her. Stephen led the girl into the house. Alice looked around with interest. Old-fashioned decor, like in movies about life in the USSR. A round table in the center of the living room. A sideboard with beautiful dishes behind glass doors. Knitted round doilies everywhere. Cozy, nice, clean. Alice liked it here. It would be pleasant to live in such a place. Eleanor Peterson is in her room, Stephen said, and led the guest further. Passing through a narrow, empty corridor, they found themselves in a spacious, bright room. At first glance, Alice was struck by the abundance of books. Two walls were completely covered with shelves filled from floor to ceiling with multicolored volumes. It was a whole library. Alice's breath was taken away. She ran her eyes over the spines. Classics, detective stories, encyclopedias, and many books on economics. Eleanor Peterson taught at the Economic College. Victoria had said something like that, so it wasn't surprising. Opposite the window stood a massive desk, piled high with notebooks and papers. A working mess. Against the free wall, not occupied by shelves, was a bed. And on it sat Eleanor Peterson. Seeing the woman for the first time, Alice was a little embarrassed. An authoritative cold gaze and displeased, furrowed brows. She sat on the edge of the bed, straight as a board, and looked at the entering Alice with a kind of reproach. "Meet Mom." Victoria, who had appeared in the room, smiled. "This is Allie. Remember I told you? Sarah's daughter. She'll live with you for a while." "I don't need a caregiver," Eleanor Peterson stated stubbornly. "I've told you this many times. My hands obey me. A little training, and I'll be as good as new." "The doctor said you can't be alone," Stephen reminded her. "So don't argue." It was clear that the adult children had tried to convince their stubborn mother many times that she needed help. Alice hadn't expected Eleanor Peterson to argue. She thought she herself was afraid to be alone in the house. But the elderly woman seemed to think otherwise. Victoria sighed tiredly. "Mom, why are you acting like a child? Alice will live with you for a while. If you get stronger, regain your strength. That is, when you rehabilitate." Victoria corrected herself immediately under her mother's stern gaze. "Then she'll go back home. That's all." Eleanor Peterson tried to get up from the bed, but she couldn't. It was clear that the woman's legs were very weak. Alice immediately rushed to her, offered her shoulder for support. It came naturally to her. Eleanor Peterson smiled bitterly and used the support. "All right," she decided. "Let her live here for now, but only until I get rid of the effects of the stroke. And I will get rid of them. Believe me, you won't see me defeated." "Who would doubt that?" Victoria smiled. Relief was reflected on her face. Finally, they had achieved their goal. "You always get what you want," Stephen supported his mother. I don't remember it being any other way. Then Stephen and Victoria showed Alice the house. There were 4 rooms: the living room, Eleanor Peterson's bedroom, her son's and daughter's former children's room, and a small empty room that apparently once served as a gym. At least there was a wall bar, a pull-up bar, and an exercise bike in the corner. Dad used to work out here, Stephen explained. He liked to say that movement is life. He tried to get me into sports, but it didn't work out. Victoria teased her brother, pointedly glancing at his impressive belly. It didn't work out, Stephen agreed. You'll live here, Victoria announced. If you want, you can work out. Consider it saving on a fitness center. Stephen laughed loudly at his sister's joke. Both of them were in a good mood now that the issue was finally resolved. You'll sleep on the sofa. Bed linen and towels are in the closet. Then Victoria wrote down everything necessary in a thick notebook. A list of medications Eleanor Peterson had to take, the schedule of the invited masseur, and the elderly woman's approximate daily routine. There was quite a lot of information. If anything happens, call immediately, Victoria said. Once a month, we will transfer your salary to your card. You will buy groceries and medications with Eleanor Peterson's money. She knows about it. Mom might start being difficult suddenly, Stephen admitted. Victoria gave her overly talkative brother a meaningful look. Don't listen to him. Mom's character is, of course, peculiar, but she has always been a reasonable person. Unfortunately, the stroke hasn't changed anything in that regard. So everything will be fine. Well, and if anything, call me. Victoria and Stephen, having given Alice the final instructions, slipped out of the house. It seemed to the girl that they were eager to return to their own lives, their own affairs. They had handed their mother over to the care of a distant relative and were happy about it. Strange relationship. The girl took a deep breath and went to the room. She needed to get acquainted with the person she would now be living with. Alice hoped that Eleanor Peterson would like her. My little ones have flown away, the elderly woman smiled. She was sitting in the armchair, where Stephen had left her. They've pawned off their mother on a young girl, and they're happy. But why do you say that? They care about you, they worry. Well, yes, they left. They both have work, you see. Ah, girl. Eleanor Peterson smiled. A young, naive creature. You don't understand anything in this life yet. Come on, let's get acquainted. What did you say your name is? Alice. Maybe I'll put the kettle on. We'll sit in the kitchen, chat, get to know each other better. Excellent idea. Alice, happy to have something to do, ran to the kitchen. She boiled the kettle, put a vase of candies she found in the cupboard on the table. Being in charge in someone else's house was unusual at first. On the other hand, that's exactly why she had been invited here. When everything was ready, the girl helped Eleanor Peterson get to her place. The elderly woman, of course, was putting on a brave face, trying to show that she was perfectly steady on her feet, but that wasn't the case. Her arms and legs were weak, sluggish, barely obeying her. Alice understood that Eleanor Peterson, usually authoritative, strong, and energetic, could not yet come to terms with her new condition. And she imagined how terrible and painful this must be for a person used to an active life. The girl's heart ached with pity for Eleanor Peterson. "My favorite candies!" the elderly woman exclaimed happily, seeing the set table. "Mine too," Alice smiled. "You're just a child. Hello, everyone." Eleanor Peterson examined Alice carefully. How old are you? 19, the girl replied. And you look younger, like a teenager. That's from my mom. She always looked younger, too. Looked. Oh, Sarah, Sarah. Eleanor Peterson shook her head sadly. I hardly knew her. Only saw her a couple of times when she was a child. We didn't really communicate with her cousin, Sarah's mother. She didn't lead a very good life. I'm sorry, that's your grandmother. I know that story. Mom told me, Alice said. That's why Mom ended up in the orphanage. Her parents drank. They didn't look after her at all. Well, and so, I've thought about it many times. Maybe we should have taken Sarah in. My children were a little older than her. But then it seemed to me that I had broken free from that family, from that vicious cycle. I didn't want to go back to the past. And I didn't find out that Sarah was in an orphanage right away. I thought her paternal grandmother had taken her in. After all, her father had a mother. She didn't. Alice sighed. For some reason, she didn't like this conversation. It felt as if Eleanor Peterson was trying to find an excuse for not taking in the daughter of her deceased cousin. But she wasn't obliged to, after all. Eleanor Peterson asked Alice questions, inquired about her childhood, studies, and work. The mistress of the house sighed sadly and shook her head, listening to how difficult Alice's life had been after her mother's passing. At that moment, there was no hint of the irritation on the woman's face that she had shown when meeting her young guest. Alice liked this about Eleanor Peterson: her sensitivity, empathy, and attentiveness. Upon learning that the girl had to drop out of the economics faculty, Eleanor Peterson visibly livened up, even seemed to brighten. You'll re-enroll next year, she stated confidently. You'll study distance learning. By then I'll be stronger. I won't need someone with me all the time. I need to prepare, Alice said, spreading her hands. Tutors, all that. To get back on scholarship, you need to pass an exam. I checked, and I don't have the means yet. Why do you need some stranger as a tutor when you have me? Eleanor Peterson was transforming before her eyes from a sick, weak, hunched old woman into a businesslike, energetic woman. I taught at the economic college for so many years. I'll prepare you so well, they'll snatch you up. That I promise you. Yes, Victoria and Stephen told me, Alice smiled, but you need to rest. Idleness is the worst punishment for me. Fate has given me a gift in you. Finally, there is someone who can benefit from my experience. Thank you, Alice said, a little flustered. She hadn't expected it to turn out this way at all. Life in Eleanor Peterson's house settled into a routine. Alice was wonderfully settled in the gym room. A cozy sofa, a desk for studying by the window, even a laptop left by Eleanor Peterson's husband. In the evenings, the girl watched movies on it, sometimes alone and sometimes with Eleanor Peterson. Afterwards, they would discuss the characters for a long time, arguing or joking. There was no trouble with Eleanor Peterson. Yes, Alice had to do everything around the house. Clean, dust, cook. But the woman, who had suffered a severe stroke, tried to manage household chores as much as possible on her own. Victoria had warned that Alice would likely have to wash Eleanor Peterson. Alice was a little scared and embarrassed by this. But the elderly woman managed on her own. She only needed to be escorted to the bathroom and then back to the bedroom. Alice was amazed by Eleanor Peterson's organization. She never forgot to take her pills on time. The girl never had to remind her. The woman herself swallowed the pills, laid out on the table beside her bed at the right time. And Eleanor Peterson had also made a training schedule for herself and never broke it. She would wake up in the morning, sit up in bed, and start working on her other arm and both legs with the hand that was more or less obedient. It was difficult for her. Alice could see that. Her face, etched with wrinkles, would turn red from the effort, and beads of sweat would appear on her upper lip. But the woman didn't give up, repeating the movement that required incredible effort again and again. It commanded respect. And there were results. At least, that's what Eleanor Peterson said. She claimed that every day she felt her strength returning, and assured that lack of movement was the worst thing, that even a healthy person could turn into an invalid from idleness, because everything in nature is wisely arranged and unnecessary bodily functions gradually atrophy from disuse. Alice found it interesting to listen to Eleanor Peterson's reasoning. She learned a lot from this intelligent, erudite person. However, the hostess sometimes was surprised by Alice's lack of education. In her opinion, the girl didn't know elementary things, had poor knowledge of art and history. What, you're not interested in anything at all? Eleanor Peterson asked, looking sternly at Alice. I was an excellent student in school and university. Alice lowered her eyes shamefacedly. Next to Eleanor Peterson, she realized that she really wasn't very knowledgeable. But this turned out to be fixable, because Eleanor Peterson had many books, and Alice read. She read voraciously, selflessly, without stopping. Eleanor Peterson also often sat with books. And Eleanor Peterson also drew up a study plan for Alice so that she would definitely pass her exams with high scores in the winter and get into the distance learning program at the university on a scholarship. They studied every day, always in the living room at the long oak table. Eleanor Peterson didn't miss lessons even on days when she clearly wasn't feeling well. Alice tried to postpone the lessons, offered to continue later, but this usually irritated the strict teacher who loved order and organization. Eleanor Peterson turned out to be a wonderful teacher. She knew how to present very complex topics in an accessible way, sometimes scolding her young student for being slow-witted, sometimes encouraging her, and always explaining confusing material especially thoroughly. So everything in Alice's head somehow fell into place on its own. You seem to have a talent, the girl remarked one day. You are a wonderful teacher. Eleanor Peterson beamed at this praise and immediately plunged into memories. She told Alice about how she first came to the college after university. She was scared to go to her first lecture for students who were only slightly younger than herself. Even her knees trembled. But of course, she managed. Eleanor Peterson loved her work. She lived for it. And even after becoming a mother, she couldn't put her life's work in second place. It's my fault that the children grew up like that, Eleanor Peterson confessed one day. I should have paid more attention to them. But I bought them off with toys, demanded excellent grades, ideal behavior. Yes, I'm an ace in economics. But child psychology is still a dark forest to me. Alice was silent then. What could she say? The girl perfectly understood what Eleanor Peterson meant. Stephen and Victoria visited their mother rarely, and they called to check on her no more than once a week. It was as if Eleanor Peterson was a stranger to them. Both had achieved a lot in life. Stephen was a department head at the local gas plant, and Victoria worked as an engineer in a design bureau. Good positions, high salaries, strong families, plus all the attributes of successful people: cars, travel, large apartments. It seemed like a source of pride and joy for any mother. But the relationship between the grown children and Eleanor Peterson hadn't worked out. They, of course, fulfilled their duty. They didn't abandon their mother. After the stroke, they found a caregiver for her, and not just a stranger from the street, but a relative, albeit a distant one. But neither of them intended to sit with their sick mother themselves. During their rare visits, Victoria and Stephen said perfunctory phrases to Eleanor Peterson, asked trivial questions out of politeness, and always inquired if she needed anything. Having fulfilled the social protocol, they broke away from their busy, bright lives, satisfied that they wouldn't have to appear here for a long time. At first, Alice was surprised by such relationships. She couldn't understand the children's indifference to their mother. It was so unlike the girl's relationship with her own mother. Despite their poverty, they always supported each other, talked a lot, laughed, and grieved together. This gave Alice the strength to live. It nourished her with energy. But here, it was as if they were complete strangers. Then Eleanor Peterson confessed that she had paid almost no attention to her children. I worked from morning till night, and so did my husband. Victoria and Stephen were essentially raised by their grandmothers. From our side, there were gifts, beautiful clothes, trips. Perhaps that's how we tried to compensate for the lack of communication. Eleanor Peterson said that work had always been her priority. Children sometimes, they even irritated her. They constantly asked questions, demanded attention. She had to take care of them, get distracted. Of course, the woman loved her son and daughter. She did everything she could for them. She got rare electronic construction sets for Stephen from abroad, paid for Victoria's expensive costumes when she took up ballroom dancing, sent the children to camp by the sea. When they grew up, using her connections, she helped her son and daughter get into the faculties they dreamed of, and then also helped them find jobs. At some point, our relationship became transactional. Eleanor Peterson sighed. I noticed it late. My daughter refused to discuss her boyfriend with me. I saw she was dating someone, but Victoria avoided talking about it. My son, he didn't say anything to me except, "Hi, bye, top up my card." My husband was angry with the children, called them ungrateful, spoiled, selfish. In part, that was true. But we were also to blame. I don't know. Alice shook her head. My mother also worked constantly and didn't give me any such gifts. But nevertheless, we cared for each other and understood each other. I don't think you are to blame for anything. She was sad to hear this story. The girl felt that Eleanor Peterson was trying to justify her son and daughter by taking the blame on herself. And this also showed her maternal love. And Victoria and Stephen, they were indeed spoiled and selfish people. Perhaps Eleanor Peterson's only fault was that her children have received everything they wanted from a young age, giving nothing in return. That's how they grew up as consumers, believing that everyone in the world owed them something. And Victoria sincerely considered her well-fed childhood difficult just because her mother didn't always have time to watch her performance. What did she know about a difficult childhood? When your mother is at work all day and you, a 10-year-old, have to run to the shop yourself and make dinner? Alice even liked it, taking care of her mother. She was so tired from work. Mom, the girl felt sad again. How she missed her voice, her smile, her warm gaze. Stephen and Victoria didn't appreciate their happiness. They, unlike her, could visit the person closest to them at any moment. Only they weren't in a hurry for some reason. Alice helped Eleanor Peterson get to the living room. Lately, despite regular exercises, she had noticeably declined. The girl had called doctors to the house several times. They just shrugged. What do you expect? Age, extensive stroke. She's lucky she's not completely bedridden and is in her right mind. You know how it can be. It was hard for Alice to see Eleanor Peterson weakening right before her eyes. She put on a brave face, tried to look cheerful and healthy, but more and more often, she needed to lie down during the day. Less and less often, she asked to be taken out to the garden, to sit among the cherry trees, to chat with Duplex, to breathe the fresh air. Alice shared her observations with Victoria and Stephen. They sighed sadly and said much the same as the doctors. Age, stroke, what can you do? However, Stephen promised to try to arrange for Eleanor Peterson to go to a sanatorium. They were supposed to support and treat her there. Such elderly patients were not legally admitted there, so the man was looking for alternative ways. But for some reason, the matter was dragging on. Alice suspected that Stephen wasn't trying very hard. On the screen, the characters were sitting at a cafe table, arguing. Eleanor Peterson watched with interest. The hand holding the teacup trembled noticeably. It had become completely weak. Alice noted this alarming detail with pain. Something had to be done. But who? Who to turn to? If the doctors explained everything happening by the patient's age, and her own children didn't care about their mother's condition. Suddenly, Eleanor Peterson turned pale. Instantly, right before her eyes, the cup fell from her hand. The tea spread in a dark puddle across the table. The elderly woman clutched her head. It became clear that she was in great pain. I'll be right back. Alice jumped up from the armchair. I'll call an ambulance right away. The girl had no doubt that the matter was serious. She didn't even ask Eleanor Peterson what exactly was bothering her. To the dispatcher, who answered the call, the girl said that her grandmother was having a stroke, losing consciousness, and needed help as soon as possible. Alice hoped that after such words, the crew would arrive as quickly as possible. Then the girl returned to Eleanor Peterson and saw that she had vomited right on the carpet. The elderly woman was sitting, leaning back in the armchair, pressing her relatively obedient hand to her forehead. Alice had never seen her so lost and frightened before. Water? The girl asked. She didn't know what other help she could offer Eleanor Peterson, but she desperately wanted to ease her condition in some way. She shook her head negatively. She's reacting to speech, that's good. I called an ambulance. Thank you, Eleanor Peterson said in a weak voice. It's very similar to my condition. Probably another stroke. They warned me it was possible. Speech was difficult for the woman. Her tongue was tangled. The sounds were sparse. Everything will be fine. Help is on the way, the girl said. She hoped her words would give Eleanor Peterson strength. If only she could hold on until the doctors arrived, they would know what to do. Girl, you are so good, kind, sweet, well-mannered. Sarah managed to raise a decent person. Unlike me. Even in this state, Eleanor Peterson continued to blame herself for how her daughter and son had turned out. Unbelievable. But you, Victoria and Stephen are great. They've achieved so much. And if something happens to me, be sure to go up to the attic. There's something for you there. A gift from me. It's in a hiding place under the floorboard near the dormer window. Nothing will happen to you, Alice objected. The words about the hiding place in the attic seemed to Alice to be the product of Eleanor Peterson's fevered mind. They sounded too much like a fairy tale. If nothing happens, good. But if something does happen, be sure to go up. You deserve this gift. I am so grateful to you for your care and kindness. Words cannot describe it. Okay, I promise, Alice assured Eleanor Peterson. Just please hold on. I'm applying to university soon. We have to celebrate this event to the fullest. And if you're in the hospital, it won't happen. You'll get in, girl, Eleanor Peterson smiled. Alice noticed that the smile was crooked, only on one side of her lips. And everything will work out for you. Then there was a knock at the door. The room filled with people in uniform coats, medics. All of this reminded Alice very much of that terrible evening when her mother died. Only this time, events unfolded differently. The paramedic ordered Alice to pack essential items for Eleanor Peterson. They were taking her to the hospital, and there, of course, they would help her. Alice rushed through the rooms at lightning speed, threw a robe, slippers, a cup, a toothbrush, and many other small items into the travel bag that Eleanor Peterson had used on many business trips, things that, in the girl's opinion, would be useful in the hospital. Alice escorted Eleanor Peterson to the ambulance. The medics were taking the woman out on a stretcher. It was frightening to see a loved one in such a state. But hope lived in Alice's heart that everything would be fine. The doctors had arrived in time. They would provide the patient with the necessary help, and she would definitely come home. But Eleanor Peterson did not return. When the phone rang at 6 a.m. from an unknown number, Alice immediately understood everything. An indifferent voice announced that Eleanor Peterson had passed away in the intensive care unit. The elderly person's body could not withstand a second stroke. Alice hung up and literally slid down the wall onto the floor. How terrible and inevitable all this was. A black wave of despair slowly washed over the girl. She needed to call Victoria. The doctors didn't have the patient's children's phone numbers. Alice had given the paramedic her own number. She simply hadn't thought, in her anxiety and haste, to dictate Victoria and Stephen's numbers. Now she will have to deliver the tragic news to them. And it was very difficult. But there was nowhere else to turn. Victoria, upon learning what had happened, cried out stifledly and probably wept because her words were very indistinct and interrupted by sobs. She asked how everything had happened, got the number of the hospital where Eleanor Peterson had been taken, and then asked Alice to handle the funeral arrangements. You see, I can't just leave work, it's a busy time. Stephen is on a business trip. He won't be back until the day after tomorrow. So we don't have time. Don't worry about the money. We'll pay for everything. Alice hung up and threw herself onto the bed. She cried for a long time, giving vent to her emotions. The tears unexpectedly brought relief, although they drained her strength. The girl went to the bathroom and washed her face. She still had so much to do. She couldn't fall apart. Outside, a gray autumn dawn was breaking. Of course, Alice couldn't fall asleep. She still couldn't believe what had happened. The feeling of loss weighed heavily on her. And suddenly, the girl remembered how Eleanor Peterson had insistently asked her to go up to the attic, said there was a hiding place there, and in it, some kind of gift for her. Alice got out of bed and went into the entryway. It was chilly there. The girl shivered from the cold and regretted not putting on her warm robe, a New Year's gift from Eleanor Peterson. In the entryway, in the very corner, stood an old, dried-out ladder. It led directly to the attic. The square door in the ceiling was slightly ajar. There was no lock on it. Probably, to open the door, you just needed to push it with your hand. The girl did just that. The door opened inward, showering Alice generously with dust and wood shavings. Yes, it seemed no one had been up to the attic for a long time. It was surprisingly warm in the attic. A pleasant twilight reigned everywhere, and dust motes danced in the gray light filtering through the dormer window. Alice's nose caught the scent of some herbs. The girl turned around. Yes, ropes were hung right on the walls on which bunches of dried herbs hung. Perhaps someone, either Eleanor Peterson or her husband, had collected them once to make fragrant medicinal tea in the winter. The girl expected to see a cluttered, cramped space. In her imagination, an attic was a place where people stored various junk. But here, there was surprising cleanliness. Eleanor Peterson and her husband were clearly organized hosts. Along the walls stood homemade shelves with some boxes. Each one was labeled. Alice couldn't resist and opened a box labeled photos. Old, thick albums lay there in a neat stack. The girl took out the first one she found, sat down on the floor, leaned her back against the shelf, and opened it. Black and white pictures flashed before her eyes. On them were Eleanor Peterson, very young, her husband, and their children, little Victoria and Stephen. So funny. Such amusing little ones. And how could they have turned into such indifferent adults? The family, it turned out, traveled a lot. Alice looked at the photos from different places with lively curiosity. The parents and children posed against the backdrop of rocks, or on the seashore, or near an old castle. It was interesting for the girl, who had never even left the city in her entire life, to look at these pictures. An ordinary family. It was clear that the parents loved their little ones very much. They took them all over the world. What more could one want? Alice continued her inspection of the attic. It was so captivating, wonderful here. The girl felt as if she had entered another world or been transported somewhere into the past. Even her heavy thoughts retreated during this time. She found a box with old Christmas tree decorations. There was everything imaginable. Little foxes on clothespins, snowmen, twisted icicles. and they were so beautiful, so skillfully made, not like the cheap mass-produced goods that filled the shops before the new year. These were toys with a history, with a soul. Alice thought about it and took a glass snow maiden and a cotton snowman as keepsakes. Yes, the holiday wasn't soon, but this year she would definitely put up a tree at home, and these toys would occupy the most prominent place on it. Home. She wondered where she would celebrate the new year. She needed to find an apartment now. At least Alice had managed to save a small sum during her time living with Eleanor Peterson. Thinking of Eleanor Peterson, Alice felt sad again. And she also remembered that she had asked her to find a hiding place. It seemed to be under a floorboard near the dormer window. The girl went to the window and gently tapped her foot. The floorboard creaked and lifted slightly. There it was. The girl carefully hooked it with her hand and pulled it up. The floorboard lifted easily, revealing a spacious niche. And there was indeed a box, a carved wooden item covered with varnish. Holding her breath, the girl took the find in her hands. It was heavy, very heavy. She placed the box on the floor, opened the lid, and gasped. In the box were jewels. Yes, unusual, seemingly antique, if it wasn't fake, of course. Massive gold earrings adorned with sapphires, several thick chains, a necklace inlaid with red stones. Could they be rubies? And a brooch in the shape of an elegant dragonfly with bright blue eyes. Were those sapphires too? Alice didn't know much about jewelry, but she understood that these pieces, if they weren't skillfully made costume jewelry, were worth a fortune. Eleanor Peterson had said she wanted to give her a gift, but she couldn't have left her these treasures, could she? At the bottom of the box lay an unsealed envelope. The girl took out a folded piece of paper. On it, a long message was written in a neat and compact hand. Alice began to read. Only 2 people knew about this story, my husband and I. But Arthur Frederick, unfortunately, passed away, and so I remained the sole keeper of the secret. Therefore, I decided to write a letter in which I want to tell you how we came to possess these jewels. It happened back in the distant 20th century. It was a difficult time then, unsettled. Everyone survived as best they could. Students from France came to our college on an exchange program. Among them was Paul, a talented, passionate young man. I liked him immediately. We had a lot in common. We were both passionate about science. I was his teacher. After graduating from college, the young man was supposed to head a department in a large Russian-French company. And the young man, despite his youth, was ready for this without any doubt. Composed, purposeful, quick-witted, a worthy young man. So, Paul brilliantly defended his thesis and went to work at this very company. His position was so desirable, many would have wanted to sit in that chair. And the salary was good, the bonuses were decent, and the career prospects were simply brilliant. We communicated sometimes, rarely, because both he and I were workaholics, always working and enjoying it. I must say, I didn't even notice that Paul hadn't been in touch for a long time. He was working, nothing surprising. But one day, the young man's father called me. Jean was in despair. He claimed that his son had been framed, and now he was in prison, awaiting sentencing. He begged me to look into it. I decided that his son could get a long sentence. The desperate father simply didn't know who else to turn to? Of course, I immediately took up the investigation. I had many contacts in the necessary structures, former students and colleagues. I managed to find out what was going on. I managed to uncover a carefully planned crime. The police wouldn't have dug so deep because there was too much evidence against Paul. The case looked obvious and simple. He was framed, masterfully led to make deliberately wrong decisions. Paul was given incorrect figures and someone signed for him. As a result, the manager was accused of embezzling a large sum and abusing his official position. Paul, this honest and somewhat naive young man, fortunately, managed to gather the necessary evidence. Paul was acquitted. He went back to his homeland. He didn't want to stay in Russia anymore. But about a month after this story, Jean came into my office. I hadn't expected to see Paul's father. This man had flown specifically from France to meet me. He thanked me with tears in his eyes, shook my hand, hugged me, said that I could turn to him for help at any moment, and he would do anything for me. And he gave me this very box with family jewels, passed down in their family from generation to generation. Of course, I refused, but he was very persistent. As proof that the jewels came to me legally, Jean gave me a deed of gift for these treasures. Well, that's basically it. I preferred to put the jewels away in a hiding place and not tell anyone about them for the time being. Times were like that. It wasn't wise to publicize such things. We weren't in need of money, but who knows? Perhaps a time will come when these treasures would help our family out. So they lay for many years in the hiding place under the floorboard. The person reading these lines is certainly worthy of this gift if I have revealed this secret to them. Alice read the letter quickly, like a captivating detective story. So that's what Eleanor Peterson was like. Not indifferent to others' troubles, a fighter for justice. She conducted a whole investigation and achieved an acquittal for the innocent Paul. There was another piece of paper at the bottom of the box. Alice brought it to her eyes. It was covered with words in French. Alice didn't know the language at all, but judging by the look of it, the paper was official, with stamps and signatures. Maybe another confirmation of ownership of the jewels, or proof of their authenticity. Alice admired the jewels for a while longer. They seemed to have been created several centuries ago. A real rarity, witnesses to history. She wondered who wore them and what life was like for those noble Frenchwomen. What did they see? What did they do? No, this beauty definitely couldn't belong to her Alice. Eleanor Peterson, in revealing the secret to her, must have been out of her mind. Perhaps something in her consciousness was simply confused. Of course, the family jewels would go to her children, just like this house. At the thought that she would never see Eleanor Peterson again, Alice's heart ached again. She carefully put the jewels back into the box and put it back under the floorboard. It was time to go downstairs and start preparing for the funeral. Alice managed. She managed to organize a dignified farewell for Eleanor Peterson. Many people came. They all approached Victoria and Stephen, offering words of comfort. It was not surprising that so many people wanted to say goodbye to Eleanor Peterson. After all, she had led an active life. Many knew, loved, and respected her. After the funeral, Alice returned to the empty house. She thought she wouldn't be able to sleep, but the fatigue and tension of the past few days took their toll. The girl fell into a deep sleep as soon as she reached her soft sofa. And in the morning, Victoria came to visit. "Good morning," she greeted her. "Thank you very much for organizing the event. Everything went perfectly. Mom would have been pleased." Alice nodded briefly. "This is your payment, your last salary, and a reward for your troubles." Victoria handed the girl a thick envelope. "Thank you. And you need to vacate the house by Monday. We're letting tenants in. We've already found a family. They've paid for 4 months. So, moving on Monday." "Okay," Alice nodded. She was prepared for something like this and had already packed her main belongings. 2 travel bags stood in her room behind the door. All that remained was to find suitable accommodation. But the girl thought there would be no problems with that. She had money now. Enough for rent and living expenses until Alice found a suitable job. And the girl wasn't going to abandon her dream of getting into university. She felt ready to take the exam. And all thanks to Eleanor Peterson's efforts and persistence. Over the weekend, Alice found herself a cozy little apartment near the university and moved there. It was a shame to leave the hospitable house. But on the other hand, without Eleanor Peterson, it had become cold, empty, unwelcoming, completely alien. The girl moved quickly. She didn't have many things, just 2 bags. She didn't even need help from movers. Alice, as planned, re-enrolled in the distance learning program at the university on a scholarship. And she also found a job almost in her field. Eleanor Peterson, while she was still alive, had advised her to look for vacancies as an assistant economist or accountant. She said that employers were happy to hire students for such positions. And she was right. Now, Alice worked in a warm office, preparing reports for signing, sorting primary documents, and drafting simple papers. The salary was minimal, of course. But with her savings, Alice had enough. 6 months flew by unnoticed since Eleanor Peterson's sudden passing. Alice often remembered her wise advice. The women had helped her make her way in life. The girl thanked fate more than once for meeting her. It was just a shame that they had known each other for such a short time. It was a March day, the eve of Women's Day. The weather, to be honest, was not at all cheerful. From the morning, the sky was covered with gray, gloomy clouds, and snow was falling again. And how she longed for bright sun, warmth, clean, dry asphalt. But never mind, all that was not far off. Alice trudged home, shivering from the March weather. At the door of her apartment, the girl found a white envelope, some kind of notification. At home, Alice immediately took out the letter with the signature and seal. It was from a notary. She was invited to appear at the notary's office on the morning of March 9th. At that time, Eleanor Peterson's will would be read. Alice remembered, of course, the box under the floorboard. Her heart pounded anxiously. Could it be? But common sense told her that such a thing was impossible. It was a fortune. Of course, the box would go to Victoria and Stephen. Perhaps Eleanor Peterson had left her some household appliances. A washing machine would be great. The one in Alice's rented apartment was very old. It didn't even wring out clothes properly. At the appointed hour, Alice sat in the notary's office. Victoria and Stephen were also there. They were the last people the girl wanted to see. These people made her feel uncomfortable. Victoria tried to put on a friendly expression when she saw Alice, but it was clear that she was displeased at having to share any part of the inheritance with a stranger. Stephen didn't even try. He gave the girl an irritated look and nodded briefly in greeting. The notary, an elderly man in horn-rimmed glasses, began to read the will. Eleanor Peterson had left her children a good inheritance. The house, an apartment in the city center, cars, and a garage were transferred to their ownership. Yes, this was the result of the hard work of both Victoria and Stephen's parents. Everything was for them, for the children. The heirs smiled. It was clear that both were quite satisfied with this turn of events. Eleanor Peterson had divided all the property equally between her son and daughter. And now about the inheritance of Alice Peterson, the notary said. At these words, Victoria and Stephen listened attentively. They were puzzled. All the property seemed to have gone to them. What other inheritance could there be? Alice shrank under their gazes. Eleanor Peterson left